Hello and welcome to Love Muslims Critique Islam Part 13, Spain. We will be exploring the myth that Islam enriched Spanish culture, and throughout the series of videos I'll be sharing with you the truth of Islam that you won't get from the mainstream media and you won't get from Muslims. So let me reveal to you the secrets imams don't want you to know and take you on a journey of absolute truth. The modern view that pre-Islamic Spain, Hispania, was barbarous is a myth, and Spain before the Moors was not in the Dark Ages. The Visigoth Catholic kingdom was a prize of wonder to the 8th century Muslim invader that reached as far north as central France, sacking towns and villages and burning churches along the way. They took less than 10 years to reach northern Spain, but were stopped from having an Islamic stronghold in the rest of Europe when they were defeated by the forces of Charles Martel. See, the thirst for booty and slaves is what drives the Muslim armies onwards from North Africa in the spirit of jihad, which is holy war. They used force to overcome resistance and granted pacts to the Visigoth leaders to either convert to Islam, become second-class citizens, and pay a jizya, which is a protection tax, under Islamic rule, or die. Which would you choose? The overall objective is therefore to humble the people and get them to submit. And the pacts and treaties were only temporary. You see, the Muslim invaders were heavily outnumbered and needed the cooperation of local leaders. So certain privileges were awarded to those showing little resistance by allowing them to keep their land, servants and religion. Chronicles of the time describe a gradual grinding down of local Christian resolve and would use large cauldrons to boil the flesh of killed Christians to assert fear and panic to produce order and submission. Peace pacts were designed to be deceitful and justified under Islamic legal tradition. You see, the way of Islamic law is not to recognize any other law other than its own. As Muslim forces marched on, churches were burnt and destroyed, and in Cordoba, for example, Christian defenders were burnt alive as they shouted in their churches and refused to surrender. But those who did surrender, well, they were beheaded anyway. Now, despite modern historians claiming pre-Islamic Spain was in the Dark Ages, archaeologists can find no proof of this. Visigoth culture of the 5th century was more enriched compared to that of the invading Arabs of the 8th century. Now, medieval Muslim historians describe the astonishment of the invading armies at the splendor of Toledo, Seville, Cordoba, Merida, and other cities. And chronicles describe precious jewels of great workmanship and quantity, literature and philosophy and works of art. Now, a Muslim historian called Ibrahim Khaldun, he noted the cultural chasm between Arabs and the Greeks and Persians, observing the coarseness of the Arabs who were without education and were unskilled in arts and writing and mathematics. And they would use Jews and Christians to handle their administrative duties. And he also pointed out that the uncultured Arabs learned science from the Greeks thanks to translations from Christian scholars. And I noted that the Caliph al-Mansur requested mathematical works of the Greeks, including applied algorithms and algebra. Christian civilization in Spain, she would have benefited greatly from Greek heritage, but it was the warring Muslims that prohibited a free flow of knowledge and commerce in the Mediterranean Sea, and consequently it slowed down Spanish development in the Middle Ages. But the picture there is of the mosque, now a church again, in Cordoba. It was the Christian Basilica of St. Vincent, which was demolished to make way for a mosque. And its Qibla, by the way, is facing neither Petra or Mecca. And they use Hispano, Roman, and Visigoth art incorporated into its works. And they also use the facade of the St. Vincent, and they adopted Roman building techniques for red and white stone brickwork that you can see in the picture for the arches, and copied the design of Greek, Roman, and Visigoth design. So there is an assumption still today that Islam preserved classical knowledge of the ancient Greeks and educated Europe with it. But the truth being that ancient Greek text and culture was preserved and studied by monks and was never lost to Islam. In fact, Roman literature and law would have been lost forever if it wasn't for the scholars and scribes of Christian Constantinople. And it was Christian scholars that brought Greek knowledge to Islam. And only because Muslim forces conquered areas of rich Greek Christian civilization. It is this ancient education that helped enhance Christian and Islamic civilization. As Muslims continued to pillage and destroy monuments and pre-Islamic heritage, the Christian population would fall due to the conversions and Christian expulsions, and Visigoth Spain dwindle as records and documentation would be lost. Changing churches into mosques would be a standard feature of Muslim rule, and all mosques had to be large in height and grandeur to impose the state of Islamic superiority. This transformation would be swift, and it will make a bold statement of conquest. As nice as it is to think that Islamic Spain was a peaceful cohabitation of culture, it was more out of convenience and necessity to survive than genuine centuries-old love fest, and the worst centuries of continuous power struggle. A distinction between the two cultures becomes more apparent over time as Christian separation with Muslims in everyday life widened. I'll give an example. So it was not even allowed for a Muslim to eat what a Christian had hunted. Christian food would be strictly forbidden because Christians did not follow the Islamic ritual of halal slaughter methods. And eating in a Christian home would raise questions of impurity, because to them, Christian cooking would include forbidden food and drink like pork and wine. And all dishes and cooking implements used by Christians had to be properly cleaned according to Islamic rules. Even places where Christians had walked barefoot would be considered impure. Once they conquered, they would set about subjugating the population and assert their hold over them, and by using methods of ruthless terror. There were many examples of barbaric treatment of Christian infidels by their Muslim rulers. Well, for example, mass decapitations and crucifixions were, well, just commonplace, really, for anyone challenging Islam. But by comparison, Spanish Christians, they never crucified their enemies, and crucifixions were stopped being a punishment in Western Europe as Christianity spread across that region. See, Islam is not tolerant of other religions, and it sees all other beliefs as inferior. The Muslim conquerors would ruthlessly terrorize their subjects, as I said, and give them just three options: to convert, or become dhimmi, which is a second-class citizen, or die. Not much of an option, really. Though many Christians enjoyed elite, privileged administrative positions, the majority did not, and consequently suffered. They would not be treated well and will be humiliated and forced to pay their protection tax. Muslims could celebrate their religion in public, but not a Christian, and they must always be discreet. So there was no religious autonomy for Christians. There was Christian resistance, and many were martyred for their faith. So for telling the truth about their faith, they had to deny Muhammad as a true prophet, and therefore falling foul of the Islamic blasphemy law, the penalty of which is death. You see, they would make new intimidating laws to make life hard in general for Christians, with a very clear message of, look, we are in charge of you. And there was no such thing as multiculturalism, and Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived a precarious coexistence. Muhammad, one of the officers of Abdul al-Rahman III, not the Muhammad, he chose the 100 most important barbarians, that's the Christians, and sent them to Al-Kafar of Cordoba, where they arrived March the 2nd, 939. But since An-Nasir, who was Abdul al-Rahman III, he was vacationing in the orchard of An-Nura, or An-Nuria, they were taken there. Their marching coinciding with people exiting from the Al-Jama or Al-Yama Mosque of Cordoba, and upon the conclusion of Friday prayer, so that many gathered and followed to see what end the prisoners would have. And it turned out that An-Nasir was installed on the upper balcony of the orchard facing the river to watch the execution. All the prisoners, one by one, were decapitated in his presence and under his eyes, in plain sight of the people, whose feelings against the infidels are alleviated, and they showered their blessings on the Caliph. Well, there we go. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this insight into Islamic teaching. In the final episode of this series, I will be asking just how violent is Islam. But in the meantime, it's bye-bye from me.